Hello there, and welcome to the Saigon Writers Club tutorials section of the website. And if you've already watched the first two lessons, you'll know that I'm in the process of describing how the modern short story is created. And this here is lesson 3 of 7. Lesson 1 introduced the whole idea. Lesson 2 was the opening introduction area, and lesson 3 here, this one, is about the inciting moment, the conflict, kind of what the story is all about. So over 6 parts, over 6 lessons, we're going to part 1 to part 2 to part 6. Part 1, the intro. Part 2, the conflict, rising action, climax, falling action, then resolution. So part 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, 6. And so today, on this one here, it's all going to be about part 2. You see that there. The inciting moment, the conflict, the beginning of the plot, kind of what the story is all about. And the way I want to teach that is to use my own short story, Memo from the Landlord, which was published in the Dry Season 2022 Short Story Anthology, to show you how kind of that comes together. So let's begin with that. So part 2, the inciting moment, the conflict. So this is really quite important because you've done the opening, the introduction. We know who your characters are. We kind of know where you're going, what the setting is, a bit about the tone, the point of view, and all that. But the inciting moment or the point of conflict, that's the plot of the story. That's what the story is all about. So the narrative up to this point leads up to that. Then they go, okay, now I know why I'm reading this. And hopefully they're hooked and they want to know, how does it all end? And so on that little schematic there in the lower left, they have opening introduction, exciting moment, conflict. At that point, rising action, climax, falling action is all based on whatever that conflict is, based on that idea. And so, as before, I will be discussing this and introducing some kind of the how-to of this using my own short story, Memo from the Landlord. So the narrative here is actually from the book itself, from the short story itself. So I'm going to read this and then explain a bit. So we talk a lot about his dad and what's going on in his life, and this really picked up after I told him about the total solar eclipses, and that one was going to happen in Idaho in August. When he found that out, he began to plan on his own a road trip for he and his dad to see the total solar eclipse in Idaho. He said it might be the miracle that he'd been waiting for. Okay, so that's quite a bit in that little paragraph here. A solar eclipse in Idaho, if you recall from the first part, the intro, the setting here is Montana. So in August, and it's near, they can actually drive there. So Colin is the boy, says, okay, we have to go. We have to go see this solar eclipse because we've already learned the dad is super depressed. And we know why, because he's a politics reporter in 2016, 2017 in America, terrible time. People just hated each other. And so the son, the 8-year-old boy, is looking for a miracle. He's looking for some kind of solution to help his dad. And so now we say, okay, we got some plot going here. Something is going to happen. And then I add here some background of the plot. So we talk about solar eclipses in the short story. And then I add this. But you know what's really cool about total solar eclipses? It has to do with the number 400. When I told Colin about the upcoming eclipse in Idaho in August, I also told him about the 400 thing. Man, you should have seen his eyes light up. The 400 thing helps explain just how rare a total solar eclipse actually is, because more than a few things need to line up just so. I think that's where the word miracle idea started sprouting in his head, even though I'm pretty sure I didn't use that word. So what's the 400 thing? So I go on to explain the 400 thing. But here we add that detail. We want to have a little twist. We want to have a little something. So the reader learns about the 400 thing as it relates to total solar eclipses. And then how the 400 thing is viewed by Colin as that's the miracle. And so you'll notice there I italicized the word miracle. And Italics, putting words in italics, whether it's a verb or a noun, whatever it might be, can be really powerful. The trick is don't do it too much, then it has no power. And so you got to be very, very judicious on how am I going to use italics and italic words. So go on. So again, reading from the narrative. Colin immediately got how eclipses worked, but he freaked out when he understood the whole 400 times thing. He saw it as something beyond science. He saw it for what it was and what it could be. It was the miracle that he had been waiting for to help save his dad. All right, so up until this point in the story, Colin and his dad have this argument about science versus miracles. Colin says, hey, they're the same thing. Science can be miracles, miracles are science. And his dad, a hardcore journalist, depressed, just so sick of always reporting on how people hate each other. So no, science is science, miracles are miracles, and there are no miracles. They don't exist. So there's a rift between the father and the son here. And that's the point to get to this inciting moment. So when Colin learns about the solar eclipse, he learns about the 400 thing, he's convinced it's a miracle. And so he's also convinced it's the miracle that's going to save my dad. So go on with the narrative. But when he told his dad about it and said that he wanted them to go, Max said no. He had no desire or intention of going to see anything miraculous. He didn't believe in anything anymore. He most especially didn't believe in miracles. Boom! Inciting moment. Go or no go to the eclipse. Belief in miracles or not. Do they see it and they get saved, or is it just a scientific event? It doesn't matter. It doesn't help anything at all. So now we know what the story is all about. The story is about, will they go see the eclipse? Will it be a miracle? Will it help his dad? Will Colin see a miracle? Will he see science? Um, you know, what about the role of the narrator? What about the first person, the editor? Does he go too? So we know that the inciting moment, the point of conflict, the issue, the reason we're reading the story is all about this solar eclipse. So, like before, I have here that narrative on the conflict, on the point of conflict here. And I encourage you to read it. It talks about the 400 things, so you'll learn about that, and then how rare it is, and then whether or not they go. It's a total of a little over 1,000 words, but we now know what the story is about. The story is, are you going to go or not? So I encourage you to, when you stop this recording, go back, read those 2 pages on the band, and that'll take you along at the end of part 2. Next up, part 3, the rising action. Thanks for listening up to now, and I wish you a very, very pleasant day.